Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Marty. I'm the Vice President of Data Analytics and Executive Education at the Metal Service Center Institute. Before we get started, I'd like to go quickly over a couple of housekeeping items so you'll know how you can participate today. You're looking at a screenshot of the Zoom attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer's desktop. You're listening through your computer speaker system and microphone by default. If you'd like to use a phone, you can do so there in the lower left of the interface. There's an audio adjustment that you can make and then dial in. To minimize distractions and background noise during this webinar, your microphone will be muted the entire time and your camera will be off the entire time. That's so that we can focus our attention on our panel discussion today. You'll also have the opportunity to submit questions at any time to the panel, and we would hope that you'll do so at any time as we go along by using the Zoom Q&A interface, and that's at the middle at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So all of that housekeeping aside, why are we doing this topic today? There are multiple reasons, and I just wanted to cover a couple of points before I introduce the panel related to that. Number one, this comes up a lot when we do our post-webinar surveys. We've done about 8 of these webinars in the last month or so. And this is a topic, business travel, that is asked about at least once or twice in the comments on every one of those post-webinar surveys. So it's clearly vital to business going forward. Business travel and when are we going to be able to do it? There's a lot of uncertainty around the topic. You know, the timing of things being opened, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, where we're allowed to do it. The rules vary by location, by state, sometimes by local government entity. So we just thought it would be a good topic to talk about. We're not going to solve all these issues today. That should be obvious to all of you. But we can certainly illuminate a lot of them and point you to some authoritative sources, let's say, that can help direct your activities going forward. So having said all that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Tim Fisher. Tim, if you'd raise your hand. Tim's got a lot of alphabet behind his name. I'm not going to go through it all, but he is the Director of Standards Development at the American Society of Safety Professionals. Tom Kirshner. Tom, raise your hand. Tom is the Business Development Manager also at the American Society of Safety Professionals. And Mickey Scherhart, who I've known for some time, is Vice President and owner at Scion Steel in Warren, Michigan. And Mickey has also been involved with MSCI on its board of directors and has been a member of our data analytics and research committee for quite some time. So welcome to all 4 of you. And Tim, I'm gonna throw it to you to get started today.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Tim Fisher. I'm on the staff of the American Society of Safety Professionals. I'm not going to give you a long, boring bio. I've been there 25 years. I'm one of those wacky types. I've been in safety for literally almost 40 years. I got my start when I was in the service, and I worked in fire protection and search and rescue and all that good stuff in the Air Force. So I'm one of those people that have been in safety literally by accident, but I got there when I was 18. So that's where I'm at. But I want to give you a few caveats as we go through our presentation today, because the one thing we have to remember with COVID-19 is that this stuff is literally changing by the day. And I think a good example of this was 6 weeks ago. We said, we don't want people to wear masks. And what do we say now? We want people to wear masks. So what I would say is the information we're talking about today is specific to today. And that, I think, is an important thing. So that's one thing. And the other thing I want to talk about is that the answers and perspectives is based on the panelists. So that's myself, Mickey, Chris, and Tom. And you could come back and say, yeah, these guys don't know what they're talking about. And believe me, I've heard that before. So I want to make that point clear to you that I'm giving you my perspective based on my experiences. And that doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere and every time for all of you. But hopefully you get some value out of it and you don't throw too many apples and vegetables at the screen where we talk today. And then also, as I said, there's a lot of applicable COVID-19 websites. If it's one thing I do want to talk to you today about a little bit, and I know we're going to talk about travel and business retention and all that, but if I could say one thing today I think is very important is you need to look at valid websites. U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, Center for Disease Control, World Health Organization, our site, the American Society of Safety Professionals. I have seen too many companies and organizations spend money and materials and do things based on something that they read on on an internet site that somebody posted that had no background at all. I don't want you to waste money and time. And so if it's one thing I would say today is make sure you're looking at valid information sites. And Chris has got a lot with his stuff as well. So that's one thing that I think is very important. So these 3 points and our 3 disclaimers is the one thing that I think is important. So what are we going to talk about today? And that is, following the presentation, we're going to have some Q&A. And listeners, we're going to ask that you submit questions also. So Chris is going to be monitoring the Q&A site and ask those questions. And if you think we're wrong, you submit a question or a comment that says, you know what, Tim, Tom, Mickey, Chris, I don't think you know what you're talking about, and I think it should be X. And if it is, send it to us, because maybe there's a chance that we got something wrong. So we've had some opening comments from MSCI, which you've already heard. We're going to give a short update presentation. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some areas that are taking place with travel and work procedures, and then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion in between these different themes. And then what we're going to do, we're going to talk about the whole situation of COVID-19 and the immediate future of business travel. Now, one thing I would say is important on this one as well is when we talk about business travel, it's not only by airplane. And for example, Mickey had pointed out to me that a lot of the people on this call, you got customers in the immediate area, and you may be shipping product and it's there in 2 hours. Now, there's an awful lot which is going on as far as customer retention, service, things that people didn't think about. Usage of tools is a big one. If your people aren't going in with tools, we can touch on that a little bit also. When can your sales force get back on the road? So whether it's by car or anything, how are you going to handle it? And I think this is going to be good. That's what we have Tom Kirshner on here for. Tom has been a career sales pro, so he can give us some thought on that. And Mickey, I was very impressed with his operations. I know that he deals with an awful lot of customers, and he definitely knows what he's talking about on that, because you don't run that kind of business if you don't know how to interact with your customers and your clients. And I know that very well. And then, what are some of the considerations that we want to talk about? What are we looking to do? And a lot of that, I think what we're going to talk about today is going to be based on where are we going. But first thing I want to do, though, is I would like to defer to our panelists and see if they'll give us a minute or so on some things that they would like to say. I'll start with Tom. Tom, what would you like to say to our people today?
One of the things we've noticed during this period of time is your safety professionals are being pressed more than ever. Most of your safety professionals have varied degrees. They are your key people to go to, your safety consultants, but they're being pressed even harder. And our 40,000 members are suddenly epidemiologists. They are infectious disease specialists, when in fact, many of them are engineers like Tim. They are still going to be one of your front line of defenses. They are still going to be the people that care and can do this type of work. They're also looking at how do we train people differently. Normally, 9 weeks ago, most of our training would have occurred live, face-to-face, where you were with one of our subject matter experts, he was in your facility, or you came to one of our classes. We have moved a great deal of that training virtually, and we are seeing that across the industry. I would be wary of who you're taking training with. Take your training with known good entities, people who have a track record, not a Johnny-come-lately that just suddenly has an interesting webcam. There's a lot of good content out there. There are a lot of great subject matter experts. Chris has our direct line should you need to find people to bring into your facilities to do very specific technical training on safety. ASSP would be happy to refer you to those valued sources. Does that help, Tim?
It does. And then I want to get Mickey on here, because first time I talked to Mickey was today, and it took me about 30 seconds, and I mean this in a good way, to realize this guy has a lot of experience in this industry. Plus, he's an owner of the company. So this guy has the combo of practical expertise and knowledge and the client retention thing that we're looking at talking about today. So Mickey, I'm going to throw you under the bus on this one. And I'd like to get your thoughts on where we're going to go forward with this as far as the whole issue of customer client retention and the travel aspect. What do you think?
Tim, I thank you. And the first thing I'd like to say is I think it's a real pleasure to be in this industry right now, because I think these weekly meetings that Chris is driving and getting over 150 people on this call today shows how committed we are to help each other. I mean, safety is one of the things that we can all share best practices, best ideas. And as you said already, Tim, it's changing every day. And so working together to keep all of our people safe in our own companies and throughout the industry makes me very proud of what we're doing to make sure we get this right. And I think there's a bunch in the slides that I'll comment on, but we're a relationship-driven industry. We have salespeople that want to get out and see people. We want to make sure we keep our customers safe, our employees safe, and hopefully not only with the slides, but also some comments from the audience that we all learned something else besides what we put together today. So glad to be part of this.
Yeah, and Chris, you're not getting out of this, sir. Any final comments you'd like to make to our group before we move on?
I think you guys did a great job. I think the key thing today to know, and Tim, you said it, and I said it before that, we don't have all the answers. I'm not sure there are answers to some of these questions. But I think the key here is to illuminate the issues. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We're going to get to it, but just for the listeners on this, we had a discussion on the handshake right before this thing started, and we're going to touch on that a little bit. But I mean, the handshake has probably been in effect since I'm assuming since the first human met the second human, and so we've got a lot of things to change. So let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about the background, and we'll talk about the different themes, and basically we got some things that we're going to talk about. And these are going to lead into the whole issue of travel. Now, one thing I do want to make people clear on is we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the travel industry. And I want to give you a little of a personal perspective on this. And that is anybody who knows me, and I may know some of you speakers, or some of the people that are on the panel. I've talked to a lot of people in this industry over the years. And that is anybody who has worked with me knows that I am not the epitome of empathy and sensitivity, I guess would be the way to put it. I work with Tom Kirshner, and he could say that. And where am I going on this? And that is, if it's one thing that I have absolutely learned, is that I have underestimated the human aspect of this situation. And I think it's important, and when we work with our people, that we understand that there's a lot of different feelings, there's some fears and concerns out there. And so I think the one thing we want to talk about is what other areas and other businesses are doing to help control for this. And I think this was a serious mistake that I've made many times over the years, and I'm trying to work on it. But my point on it is we did a plan for return to headquarters at my facility. And when you read our plan, basically the people looked at it says, Tim, your mechanics are fine, but you have absolutely nothing in there about the human aspect. And I went out and talked to my people on this and our different teams at the society. And lo and behold, yes, they were absolutely right. And I was wrong. So my point on it is when we look at these things here, remember about this from the aspect of working with your people, which we, I think, would all agree are our most important asset, especially when we're talking about your salespeople, your marketing people, your client retention people. They're going to play a key role. So, what are we looking at with these themes? What are organizations doing to bring Americans safely back to work? We're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to talk about the virus and learning experiences for everyone and how this has taken place. And, in safety and health, it's front and center. But as we move past this pandemic, what next? What's going to happen? Because, think about one thing here when we talk about pandemics. There's been an awful lot, which has actually taken place in the last 15 years. This has been the one thing. But anybody remember avian flu was another one, and SARS and all this stuff. So this is something that I think, whether it's COVID-19, Corona, or, a future pandemic, Ebola, if anybody remembers that, Ebola had a big impact about 2 years ago as far as travel from organizations and companies to certain parts of Africa because of fears with Ebola. So we'll get a little bit into that as we go along. Before I move, does there anybody have a comment on this slide? Mickey, Tom, anything that you think we need to touch on before we move on? If not, we'll go.
I do have one. One of the panel or one of the participants typed in a question, what are good URLs? We will share some of those. There's some documents at the end. Also know that Tim and I have access to some great return to work content from General Motors, from Ford, from Grainger. They have shared their playbooks with us. As you might imagine, they are extremely deep. They would be overkill for an organization our size, but the content in them, the ideas in them, the detail they go into can be applied in a variety of workplaces. So you need not reinvent the wheel. You can you can access playbooks from other companies that have already done a great deal of research on this, that employ a number of highly qualified safety professionals, and you could probably tailor some of that content down. And if you need some of that, you could reach out to Chris, and we can share that with Chris.
Yeah, we'll make that available. That's a great idea, Tom. Thank you.
You betcha.
And within this presentation too, because we're talking about travel, so we do have areas in here on travel. So we're going to be hitting that as well. So let's talk about this. So when we go on our line here, for many companies and organizations, and this is one thing we need to have, this is one thing in a minute I'm going to ask for Mickey's opinion on this one, because we are operating on this call under the assumption that you want to get your people back out talking with clients and customers and companies and all that thing. So that's an assumption that we're making in this presentation. Now, there's no question that things have changed in telecommuting and virtual training and all this stuff. And Tom talked a little bit about some of those things. But my belief is that your industry, it's an awful lot based on personal relationships and building rapport and those type of things. So, my first thing we want to talk about is the need to resume direct sales, client retention, revenue growth, service to your people, and what may potentially happen, and what can we do now to prepare for this in the new future. So, Mickey, I'm going to ask you on this one. Do you agree with me? Am I wrong? How do you see this as far as getting in front of people? Is it going to be a critical portion of your business going forward again, or things totally changed?
Well, I think it's going to be a hybrid. Tim, I think you're going to have customers truly appreciate the personal touch and will allow you to still do that. But I think you have a lot of the bigger companies that have very strict guidelines that, we used to be, getting to know the receptionist so you could get to know the buyer. Well, I'm not sure there's going to be receptionists. There's not many of those today, but getting past the automation, whatever that may be, is going to be hard, I think, in the very bigger, larger companies. I think we're all learning this, just like we're doing a Zoom call today. I think we're going to have to be better at doing Zoom interaction with customers. I think we're going to have to get back to being better at phone call conversations. And I think it's going to really be a hybrid approach to continue to do everything. And you're going to have to figure it out, in my opinion, what the customer allows. We have customers asking us to come back out for various reasons, and we're very excited about that because we've been doing this for so long, but we're going to follow every protocol they have for their visitors. So our salespeople will have whatever's necessary with them prior to that call, which may include a thermometer. Very likely.
Mickey, I want to jump in there for a second, Tim. Part of what I think Mickey really hit on there was consider brushing up your different sets of skills. Yes, we should be able to return to work. I hope we can return to live visits. It's right. The number one thing I miss in my job right now. But his point of be prepared to work with people virtually. If you have to buy one of your folks a better webcam, do it. It's still less expensive than a per diem mileage, and they're going to need to be ready to do that. I had kind of my come to reality moment. I've been waiting for this to get over, waiting to get back to work. And last week we started to unveil our internal return to work programs, which Tim has built for our organization. And looking at that, I'm of a mind that I'm going to buy a new office chair, and we're going to be working from home, and this is going to be this way for some time. So don't assume this is going to clear up in the next 3 weeks. I realize many states have opened up, and socially and legally things have changed. From an epidemiologist point of view, things haven't changed that much yet. So prepare for this over a little bit longer period of time is what it seems like.
Excellent. Now, so I've got Mickey's perspective. Tom, Chris, I'm going to ask you what you think, because you're dealing with a lot of members, and have you gotten a consensus perspective or overriding theme which is run through this as far as getting back in front of people and companies and that type of thing? What do you think?
The only consensus that I have, Tim, is the consensus I mentioned right up front, and that's that everybody's wondering how to make this happen and when will it happen. Gotcha. So I want to actually ask Mickey another question, because he brought something to my mind that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. Every person that works for Mickey, I'm sure, has a different personality and a different level of willingness to get back out and talk to
Yeah.
people face to face.
Good point.
Mickey, how do you plan to manage that? I'm sure, it might run the gamut from gung ho, I wanted to do it yesterday, to hell
Right.
no, I'm not ever going to do it again until I have a vaccine. How do you plan to deal with that, Mickey, if at all?
Well, Chris, I don't think there's one, straight answer for all of it, but we have both. I had somebody that asked me if they can start making calls next week. And we're going to guide a lot of our decisions based on what our customers allow us to do. Again, keeping our people safe and keeping their people safe. But I think this is something we've done here at Science Steel many years ago. We transitioned that we no longer have a pure outside sales force. Most of our account managers or salespeople do a lot of what you would call traditionally the inside work. And probably not in the scope of this discussion, as it's a much longer conversation, but we've been moving away from, clearly, we don't make weekly calls for the most part. We don't make bi-weekly calls for the most part. Our survey data said most of our customers are satisfied with us seeing them every 6 to 8 weeks. And so we've taken that approach, and we use all the, the email, the phone calls, and then do other relationship things, which might be a sporting event, it might be golf, might be lunch, some of those other things to build stronger relationships. And so we've been on a path for quite some time to sort of support doing more from the office or more remotely. And so I suspect other companies on this call are going to move that direction in the near future.
Excellent. And I think that's a good lead in to our next slide. So, let's talk about what's going on. And I'm using the term travel industry. And so I'm breaking this up into two areas, because I know Mickey's talked about local travel, which I think applies. We're going to touch on that. But I'm also talking about travel. So, you're sending a sales rep from Ohio to Tennessee, and they're going to be there, he or she, for 2 or 3 days. And how are we going to handle that face-to-face contact? And for many, it's been a staple of the sales effort of many companies. So it's been many, many years. I was a failed salesperson at one time for air freight. But I would say one thing, and that is I quickly learned in my poor efforts of sales, is that, and I heard what Mickey said, but some people really have the knack of establishing relationships, and they're tough to find. So I'm assuming these are the people that we want to get on the road. So what are we hearing? And that is domestic travel is going to probably maybe start to recover around October. Now, remember what I said at the beginning on this, and that is, this is just from opinion, and I've seen it one of two ways. So if we're talking about domestic travel, that's what they're thinking, probably sometime in October. But we're going to get into this. There's going to be a lot of limitations on this one. And also we need to, once again, remember that, if we're talking about overnight travel in a plane, or if we're talking about, a 30-minute trip to a client in a town nearby. So there's different aspects. But I would say one thing, we're going to get into this, the entrance into that facility is still probably going to be the same, regardless of where you're coming from. And then if we're talking about global travel, and I'm assuming that some of your organizations and companies do some global international travel, and that's a different ballgame. And I think you're going to see that take place in about 18 months. We do have a number of ASSP members that work in the airline. So I'm going to get a little bit into some of the things that I know is taking place. And I'm not speaking for any airline. I'm just speaking from what I know as a general feedback that I've gotten. I do find it very interesting that companies have been really sharp on trying to change and go to the hybrid model, like Mickey just talked about. And that is, hey, we don't need to see a salesperson every week in our facility, and we can augment that with a hybrid approach. I kind of think that's where I think things are going to go. So I think for callers or for listeners on this call, that's going to be an important thing to remember. Chris, you're an association guy with me also. That's kind of the response I've gotten back from my members. You agree or disagree with that contention? Are we somewhat in the same area, or do you think we're wrong?
No, I think that's about right. Like I said before, I think it runs the gamut. Some people absolutely don't want to get out, right? And some folks are happy to do it now. Let me out the door, let me go visit someone. I think what's key is to understand the restrictions. And I think we're going to talk about those next. And you know, what are the right things to do when you're in obvious proximity to other human beings, when you're in an airport or when you're on an airplane or you're on a bus or whatever. So I think that's probably the key.
Excellent. So you're going to get this presentation, and this is, it's basically Travel, the New Norm. It's from the U.S. Travel Association. Now this slide, and when you look at this and you look at this information and punch this up, they're going to email you the document. So it's pretty detailed. We're going to go through some of the points in the next coming slides. So my point on this one is what we're talking about here is we're talking about commercial business travel. And this is more based on, as I said, you're going to go from city A to city B. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about right now. So, and what is the travel industry doing? Now, the reason why I'm putting this is that the people that are on the call today, it's about business travel from the perspective of your industry. But there is a point to what we're trying to do here. And that is, as I talked about before, your people have concerns. And so I think one big thing that you want to do on this is be able to show them that business and industry and the travel industry is trying to make changes. And I'm not speaking for the travel industry. They're managed by some really smart people. And the last thing they want to do is lead people to think that their equipment and their facilities are not safe, because that will kill them right away. So they don't want to do that. So let's get a little bit into that. And I think this is important. So, you know, travel's the new normal guidance. It's focused really on 6 main areas. I would suggest that you take this document if you got people who are going to be doing travel or doing overnight travel or airport travel, and you want to show this to them and make sure that they see it. And that way they're going to have a feeling to know what's going on. Now, one thing I would say as far as this presentation goes, I'm not going to go through and read slides word for word because I think it's really boring. And we have a really good panel here that I think have things to add. So if we look here with this slide right here, and that is travel businesses, what they got to do is they're modifying. And I would tell you this, we talk to an awful lot of transportation companies, and they're doing a lot of things as far, if you've seen any of the things, I don't want to use the term fumigate because that's incorrect, but some of the ways that they're doing now to clean, and I've seen this used in hotel rooms also, to clean for COVID-19, things that weren't done 3 months ago. And I'm not saying that aircraft weren't clean back then. They are going all out on this. Hotels have been really going out on this. And we have a number of our members that work in the lodging and entertainment industry as well. So I can tell you that I've seen a lot of these things. Are they perfect? I'm not claiming they are. The point is that I'm trying to say is that when you're looking at these things and talking with your people, is they need to be aware that these companies are trying to do things right. And I think that's an important point. Nobody's out there trying to hurt anybody. I would say in my almost 40 years in safety, I have never seen once anybody that intentionally tried to injure somebody or hurt somebody. I've seen mistakes made and that type of thing, but I've never seen anybody that woke up in the morning and said, hey, I'm going to blow up the safety rules because I want Tim Fisher to get hurt. Never seen it. I've seen some bad decisions, but I've never seen that. And then our second point on that one is travel businesses, they need to consider implementing touchless solutions. So you're seeing some of that now, but that's a tough thing. I'm hoping right now that somebody on this call or on this thing said, Tim just touched his face. Now think about this. What do they always say with COVID-19? Don't touch your face. But here I am touching my face and talking to 150 people. So we're trying to solve for this. There are some different things. There's some different strategies out there, new technologies. I don't know if people out there are using them, but there's things that I think you're going to see as far as apps on your phone that deal with social distancing and that type of thing. But if it's one thing that we want to deal with, it's touchless solutions where practical. So I don't know what your sales force, what they're bringing out there, for example, but if they want to do a presentation, a PowerPoint, the last thing you want to do is slap a laptop in front of the client or customer you're talking to and say, hey, here, hit this button. Don't want to do that. So you want to control that stuff. That would be one thing I'd say. I did that to somebody by accident, and they gave me a look like I was crazy and said, don't I know what's going on? And I've been working in safety for 40 years, and I made that mistake. So I would say if it's one thing you want to do is you want to do some significant travel, you want to do some significant training with your people. Tom talked about this earlier on how to interact, and you absolutely want to look at touchless solutions. I don't know as far as, a lot of what, if you're using as far as your order taking when your people are in the field, but they definitely don't want people to be handling those materials if at all possible. I also think that's probably a good business practice as well. Hey, fill out this form now. We'll take care of that. So that's one thing I think. comment.
Tim, yeah, this is maybe not the perfect spot, but I don't want to forget sharing this with everybody. And I suspect others are doing this. We have customers that no longer will accept a delivery receipt because then they have to touch a pen at the customer, or they touched our driver's pen. We have several customers now that request us to send at the beginning of the day, whatever's on that truck, the delivery receipt, they'll sign it and send it back once they receive it.
Hmm.
And so we've created a process that's gone on forever where delivery receipts get taken to with the driver. And now we've made that, sort of a touchless delivery and changed the whole documentation. Again, customer led, where customers want us to do business differently.
I think that's a great point, Mickey. I've seen this one too. We accepted a small print job last week. So this was from a small company, and I had to go into the office for this. And what they did is, and I've seen Amazon do this, so I know we're not talking about a huge corporation. This was a small one. And then what they did is they had basically they took a photo of the product in the box on our dock, and then they were able to leave. So what happened is they took the photo and it automatically stored under a certain folder. And I think that then generated some type of proof of delivery. I don't know enough to say, but I think you're right on. There are ways around this. I think this is a good lead. Okay, wait, we got a comment here. What do you think, Tom? Were you going to say something?
I do. I think I give Mickey and his company a lot of credit and people who are thinking this way. So one of the things I've noticed is there may have been some initiatives that 6 months or a year ago you wanted to try, you wanted to push, but things were stagnant. They weren't moving as fast as you would have liked. Now, when you think about what Mickey's doing there with his order confirmation, he's no longer gathering pieces of paper. That's inefficient. He's storing those pieces of paper. His driver has to bring them back and be accountable for them. His IT system is automatically logging that delivery. It's got to be faster. It should be more efficient. So as we look at some of these changes, yes, they're going to cost you money and time. Some will. Some can actually be looked at as speeding up your business growth and your business acumen. You can actually turn some of these things to your advantage and look at them as steps forward, not simply things you have to abide by. So start to look at, are there places where we can actually use this to our advantage and push a process faster than maybe we would have a year ago?
Yeah, I think so. And that's a good lead into this slide here, because the two things we also want to tell our people when they're traveling is that, one, sanitation is important. And that's what that first bullet point is saying, is we're trying to do things with sanitation. And then the second one is we're talking about health screening. Now, I just learned something on this call, and I'm usually considered to be the master of the obvious after it's pointed out to me. And so, Mickey pointed out, well, salespeople are carrying thermometers with them. Now, I've been dealing with this for 4 months now, and I never thought about that. So as I said, what a great move. So if you're dealing with your people in the field and you're going to see clients and customers and all that, and anybody asks you about it, hey, we are monitoring our health. We are making sure we are taking our own temperatures. We'll do whatever the facility wants us to do, but I want you to be aware that we're doing all this as a matter of process. And I didn't think about that until Mickey talked about it. And like I said, I think that is a really good move, because you're showing your client customer, if you're sending people in also for some type of maintenance or troubleshooting, that you're taking this serious. Mickey, I don't want to put you on the spot again, but I think that was really a brilliant suggestion. And how has that worked out for you guys?
Well, again, we have not started to travel yet of any great consequence, but we want to be prepared that if that's a criteria for going into an account, then we have it. We want to find every way possible that we can continue to build those and maintain those relationships. And if that's part of what we need to have with us, we're going to have it.
Hey,
I think that's a brilliant move. And I would think if it's one thing anybody learned out of this conference call today, if anything, is one, go to legitimate sites for information, and two is to arm your field people and salespeople with the proper equipment. So I think
I'd like to ask Mickey a question, just a quick follow-up on that. Mickey, how much I'll call it screening, but having conversations with customers or suppliers that you want to visit sometime over the next 3 months, how much of that kind of activity have you done, just to see, kind of test the waters and see what is possible or not possible?
So Chris, we're organizations, and again, a lot of people on this call probably have seen customers every day, or let's say every week for the last 20 or 30 years, if they've been in this that long. And so it's such a staple of how this industry interacts. Even with all the EDI and everything that we've done electronically, there's always been a relationship side. Chris, we did a whole webinar last week about the value of building partnerships. And so it's part of our DNA in the steel service center industry. So I've had customers say, and in Michigan, it's a little bit different because our governor keeps extending it. And so we're June 12th now. And customers have said, can't wait to see you when it's sort of approved. And so I think there is a demand for that. It's just working through the customer requirements so that we are armed and ready when we get to do that. So not sure that entirely answered your question, but sort of that's the quick answer I would give you is we think between July and August, given Michigan's stay-at-home is to the 12th, is when we'll start to get momentum back more freely. I'm sure we'll do some things in June, but we think momentum will start between July and August. And just like Tim's note about travel, I think the fall will start to feel, hopefully, a little more normal, whatever that's going to be. But that's my best guess at this point in time.
Okay. Thanks.
Excellent. We'll move on to this slide. And so this slide's interesting. Now, I heard a couple people say, and this is a good one, where do we go for legitimate information? Because our first bullet point is that you want to follow the CDC guidance, the Center for Disease Control. CDC.gov, type in COVID in the search, and you will get more than you can use. And I'm not out to make any announcement or anything, but I would tell you one thing, that if you look at the information the federal government has turned out on COVID-19, there's a plethora of it. And so whether it's from the Center of Disease Control, FEMA has a lot of material, even EPA has got into this now. So if you go to cdc.gov for the purposes of this call and just type in COVID, and you'll even see it on their homepage, you will get more information than I think you can read and use on the whole issue of COVID and how you want to deal with employees that test positive in isolation. Also, I'm assuming from this call, you're all business people, and you've probably dealt with this situation practically more than I have. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I think the second bullet point here is important. I don't want to get into this too much, but as far as food and beverage, I would say use common sense on that one. If you're driving down the road, you got people out there and you see Tim's Hot Dog Hut, and I'm talking about me now as this one, and I'm touching my face and I'm not wearing gloves and all that, probably not a good place to stop for lunch. So that's what I would tell them. You want to go to places that are using correct procedures. So that's our theme 2. We'll move on here. And what steps can you take as a business when travel resumes? And that's what we're talking about here. So if you look at our first bullet point here, what can companies and organizations utilize these services to in the future? And first, we talked about this somewhat. Is it a correct assumption that companies and organizations are going to need to send employees out? I think Mickey answered the second bullet point, I think, very clearly and decisively. And that is, it's going to be a hybrid approach. And it's also going to be if your client contacts you. So maybe one thing you want to consider as far as travel, sales, maintenance, is you're going to want to have, I would say, a policy or procedure on how you're going to respond to that. Most of you probably already do. Maybe some of you don't, but that's something you want to consider. And then also what you want to look at is how you're going to utilize, services in the future with business travel. I would say one thing. We're getting into this in a few minutes, but hopefully you've always had policies on the books as far as travel. I don't think COVID should have changed that at all. And maybe they need to be more detailed now. And I'm not trying to say that that this has to be like, some giant response plan, but hopefully you've always had something on the books or some way to, if you send somebody on a trip and they're gone for 3-4 days and they have appendicitis, hopefully you've always had a way to try and address that. And so I think then you would want to make this as part of your plan. I would not suggest that you have a specific COVID-19 plan. I think having something on pandemics as far as an overall policy and plan to be the way that I would go. I'm not trying to say you have to have a zillion piles of record keeping and procedures and processes. but I do think you need to have a way to address this, and I think that's important. Mickey, I'm going to put you and throw you under the bus again on this one because you're and Chris, you're our spokespeople for the field on this one. Do you agree with me on that? Am I wrong? You know, how do you see that?
Well, I think you're spot on. And I was thinking about what we do normally. We make sure our salespeople have safety glasses. They have a hard hat. They might even add steel toe shoes. And I think we may want to rethink, what is that travel kit in your car that we've had for a long time that hasn't changed much? Clearly, gloves would be part of that. You know, we've already talked about thermometer, but maybe other things. And so I think those are the steps that we're all going to have to keep thinking through. And again, in my mind, it's very customer led, that we're going to make sure that we do everything a customer wants so we can continue to have that relationship.
Awesome.
Mickey, have you thought through the situation, you and I talked a little bit about this earlier, where you have an employee who's traveling who does get sick?
Well, I think in our case, our travel is typically very local, say within 250 miles.
Right.
So we don't have a lot of situations where somebody's staying in a hotel or overnight. I think it's a lot like what we would see here in the office. If somebody is ill or sick, get home and take care of yourself and get to a doctor as necessary. I don't think, because we haven't made those calls yet, I think we have to think through what the protocol is informing the customers and those who've been in contact. Because clearly the salesperson is going to have to think, did I see a receptionist? Did I go and see the receiving person? Or did I just go to the purchasing department? Did I stop and say hi to somebody in engineering along the way? And so that will be much more thorough reporting, I think you would say, if indeed that happens, and let's sure hope it doesn't.
You know, Mickey, you just hit on a point that reminded me. So we had something about 3 weeks ago. Now, obviously, there's not been a lot of travel, but essential business has been something which has gone on. So I don't want to say the name of the company, but they provide service in certain areas, I would say more of life safety than anything. So what happened is this individual was sick, went to all these companies, did not tell his employer, and then his employer did not notify the company. But then he went home and put on social media that some of these other organizations he was linked with, or whatever we want to, friends with, that he had tested positive for COVID-19 and was going to be quarantined for 14 days. Now, how would you like to bend that company then got a call and said, hey, do you know that your employee just polluted our, potentially infected our, and you didn't know about it? I think you hit on an important point. So if we think somebody's sick, you got to tell your employer, and then they do the proper notifications and contacts. I think that's critical, and you hit on that point. It's one thing I want to say. That's a real situation I saw about 3 weeks ago. So,
so I'm gonna jump in there. I was ground zero at our company. Our niece pulled up positive. I got that phone call and sat at my desk for about a minute and a half and went, well, if this is one of my coworkers, I would want them to walk into our CFO's office and say, hey, I'm out. And that's what I had to do. And it's a weird thing. You talk about this in the abstract, but part of this is being able to say to your people, as ASSP has been excellent at saying to our staff, there is no shame, there is no stigma in this. Do the right thing. We're going to support you. And so part of this is a social issue, as Tim said way earlier. There are your technical fixes. There are your engineering solutions here. There's also where your soft skills and your relationships come in, and saying, this is something we're all in together. We're going to stand by you. If you are feeling ill, remove yourself from the field of play, and you can work from home. We will stick by you, but make sure your people understand, because that person who didn't admit that and then went to all those business places, you wonder, were they just foolish, or did they feel some pressure to continue that job that way? I did not have that pressure. I work for a leading safety organization. So the minute I recognized a hazard, I punched the button and we were out, and there was no harm, no foul. And we tested clean, but I don't know if that story helps you or not, but your people have to know that they can yell stop work, they can punch out.
Yeah, Tom, I want to just comment on that. you know, being in the steel business, we're very tough, hardworking people. And I think there's probably plenty of people on this call that would show a lot of pride in having not taken a sick day in years. I know of people in 10 years, 15 years. And I think one thing COVID has definitely done culturally across our industry and other industries, for good and for bad, it's going to make being sick okay to stay home at a greater level than we've witnessed probably in the 20 plus years I've been working. There was a sense of pride of being able to have perfect attendance, working through a cold. And I think that could be a cultural change way beyond us, that how that affects PTO, that's a whole HR seminar we can have someday.
Yep.
But I felt the need to at least comment in, because I am hearing that from my doctor's friends and everything else. Going to work sick is really going to be totally different from here on out.
Excellent.
You're no longer a hero for doing that.
So what we'll do is we'll finish up these last couple slides, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So this slide right here, I think is pretty much, this is a repeat of stuff that we've already talked about. Travelers getting back on the road, feeling comfortable. What do we want to do? Participation, at-home orders, we talked about those. So I think that we went into quite some detail on this slide already. And then this one here, what we're trying to show with this slide here is really how organizations are now prepared. And I think we've kind of beaten this now pretty good. We had a really good perspective from Mickey on this that told us what's going on as far as if his company, and I think his company is serving as a model for people on this call of something they might want to consider. Chris has talked about what he's seen from this industry, and Mr. Kirshner here I've called on from his perspective is what I call a hardcore sales pro, and I mean that in a good way, Tom. But Tom is you know, when we talk about a sales guy, this is the guy right here. And so that's what we're trying to show. And then there's a study out here that talks about how respondents are reporting on travel. I would take this is something you want to look at with Global Business Travel Association. So this would be a good thing I think potentially you might want to show your people as you get back on the road. This is a little slide right here, which I think is important. And these are just some things that you want to consider when you go from your shuttle to your seat. So this is what we're talking about with airplane travel. But if it's one thing I also learned today, so we're talking about these are some good ideas. When you get the presentation, I would cut this out, put it on a piece of paper, give it to your people, however you think might work on that one. But Mickey had something which I thought was really interesting. I think you called it your travel kit. Is that what you call for your salespeople and and that type of thing, Mickey? You called it your travel kit where they...
Well, in their cars, most traveling salespeople in this industry would have a certain amount of PPE, hard hat, safety glasses, ear protection, those types of things. And I think that will expand as we update policies.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I used to do quite a bit of air travel, and I was not good on having a travel kit with me. I'd go into into whatever the travel booth kiosk was, and I'd buy what I needed. I don't know if that's going to work anymore. And then there's a lot of restrictions on what you can carry on a plane and all that. So I understand that. But I think this is something good that you want to consider and something that you would want to show your people.
Yeah. From a practical standpoint, Tim, I think that's critical, because my questions were simply, how do I navigate getting on an airplane? What's the best place to sit? Should I sit on the aisle? Should I sit on a window? How do I do all that? And I thought that information was really, really nice to have.
It is. I think it's great. So I think I take that out. And actually, Chris found that slide and he sent it to me. And I looked at it this morning. I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. I think it's a really short checklist that you can give your people. You know, hey, when you're considering travel, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to consider. And if it's one thing I said at the beginning, I think is important is your people want to know that you're concerned with this. And as I said, from my own personal perspective, this is something that some people don't take that serious. Some people are very, very serious. But if it's one thing I've seen is that if people think you don't care, then you got a problem. So that would be my point.
So I want to jump in there for a second, just on talent retention. I realize unemployment is an all-time high right now. I understand that, but this is not going to last forever. Generally, talented people, like the type of people that Mickey looks to work for him, are hard to find, and it's competitive to keep them. So let's say Mickey bought every one of his field reps $25 worth of additional PPE to go in their kit. It costs them this much, but it says we care this much. I'm looking out for you. I got out ahead of this. Here's our company policy. We're arming you with these things, all the way up to and including proper training on these things. That's a small investment for either A, keeping me on the job long-term and staying productive, or B, not letting me get sick and letting me be out of work for 3 or 4 weeks. So those small investments in safety frequently pay off big. And so start to think about, where can we show our people we care, and where can we put engineering solutions in that actually protect our folks and they see that? Because this is, Tim said it earlier, this is not just a technical fix. This is getting my head around it and my social around it.
Okay, so what we've done now, I'm going to shoot this back to you, Chris. I'm actually seeing about 12 minutes, I guess, if we have any Q&A. Our caveats are up on the slide here. Remember, this is specific for this moment in time, and it's based on our experiences. Doesn't mean it's going to always work for you, or you may have a better way to do it that we're not aware of. And as I mentioned, go to the applicable COVID-19 websites for information. I mentioned them already, and we can go from there. Chris, what questions do you got for us?
Okay, so questions about location-specific information. If I have a sales force that has to travel across state lines, whether they're driving or flying, let's assume they're flying for a moment here. Is there a way to track those location-specific rules? Are there any quarantine requirements? So for example, right now, if I wanted to go to Hawaii, I'd have to be in quarantine for 14 days, right? Does that apply anywhere else? And how can I find out about that? Is there any place I can go that will track location-specific information if I have to send a maintenance person or a salesperson or a technical person into a locale?
Here's my answer to that one. It's a very good question. It's yes, no, maybe. And by that, I'm not trying to be facetious on this one. If we're talking globally, I would go to the World Health Organization where they list all the countries. Now, I know we're talking domestically on this question, but if you're talking global, the World Health Organization has its map. What's going on right now, as I mentioned earlier, the federal government has a lot of information out. The states have even more. So Ohio, for example, I've seen more stuff in the state of Ohio, for anybody on the call here from Ohio. So I think the best thing to do would be to go to the specific state, almost, and I've checked probably every state, almost all of them have a COVID-19 website that I've seen. I go on there and I check it now. Is there one specific area that's collecting everything for all 50 states? I haven't seen it. Could it exist? Possibly, but I haven't seen it. And my one thing I would say, I said earlier, I question some of the information that's out there. And so what I would do is I would go to that state, and I would go to that governmental website and check the COVID-19 site there and go from there.
So stick with the governmental agencies.
I would. And the other thing I would say too is if a company has asked you to come and for whatever reason it is, a smart move up front would be like, what rules do you have? You want me to obey? And Mickey hit on this one. So, Firm A has called me and said, hey, I need somebody to come in for troubleshooting purposes. Okay, we'll have somebody there. This is what we do. What do you want us to do? And it would be good at that point to say, is there any restrictions that you need to be aware of? And by that, like where we're at in Park Ridge, Illinois, the city of Park Ridge, which is right next to basically O'Hare Airport, does have some additional guidance and regulation that they have outside even with the state of Illinois. So that's a good thing to know.
There's another question. It's come up in the questions from the audience, and actually it comes up almost every time we talk about this. Masks versus no mask. That's part number one. Part number two is what is assuming you need to wear a mask, should you use the disposable versions or the throwaways, or should you use the cloth masks that can be washed and cleaned? And if so, how are they most appropriately washed and cleaned?
Okay, here would be my opinion on this one. So 4 weeks ago, they said, don't wear masks. Now they're saying you should wear a mask. And I'm going to say it depends on the type of work that you're going to be doing and what's going to have to be done. So for example, and I know that on this call, it's not at that purpose, but if you're going into a healthcare facility, for example, to work on a radiology machine, and I know that that's not what we're talking about here, but that's a different ball game. My suggestion would be is that you call that company that you're coming to see and ask, what do you want me to wear? If they're going to tell you an N95 respirator, good luck getting them. So my guess is you're going to probably have to wear some type of cloth mask, but I think it's important that you talk to them as well. As far as cleaning them, I would tell you one thing. So there's been some stuff out now, for example, on cleaning N95 respirators. And just so everybody's aware, an N95 respirator doesn't mean it's infallible. It means that when it's tested, 95% of all the, whatever we want to call it, was excluded from that mask, but 5% still could under certain testing conditions. Any respirator that you're going to clean, you better know the directions specifically. I've seen too much stuff. I talked earlier on this on the internet. It's like how to clean an N95 respirator in 52 seconds. Now, there's some stuff from Duke University on this. It's I wouldn't say it's a huge, gigantic process, but you better know what you're doing. So I guess specifically to your question, Chris, you need to ask the client, what's the requirements? I think what can be obtained is going to be very important also. And then as far as throwaway or cleaning, my other question would be, are they only going to one site? Are they going to be going to 2 sites over 2 days? So that's why I said it's yes. And this question is definitely a yes, no, maybe. I don't know if I answered it or danced around the question, but that would be my answer.
Okay. Well, as with a lot of things, we've said this, there aren't any clean, crisp, clear answers to all these questions. We have time for one more. So I'm going to ask the last question and then we can wrap up. But in regard to traveling between the US and Canada specifically, not all international travel, but between the US and Canada, Tim or Tom, and Mickey, feel free to weigh in here. Do you know of any quarantine requirements if a person is with an essential business and needs for some reason to enter Canada or enter the US from Canada? Do you lose that person for 2 weeks potentially, or are there provisions to allow that to happen as in a more normal mode?
I can take a shot unless Mickey or Tom would like to speak to that first.
I do a lot of work with the Canadians. I do work with Royal Canadian Navy. I have not heard about a 2-week quarantine there. The place I have seen that is Hawaii.
Okay.
Yeah, Mickey, I'll take a shot. No, I haven't seen any specific requirement. But one thing you got to remember is if you go up there and you're exposed to COVID-19, you're supposed to be quarantined. I mean, so that's one thing. And there have been some problems with that. I know there have been issues with Asian countries. I haven't seen anything specific on Canada. But once again, this would be something you would want to consider going to the CDC website on, for example, and COVID-19 Canadian restrictions, and you'll probably see whatever you need to see. And that'll be on there, cdc.gov. And then if anybody has any questions, they can always contact. I'm trying to get people running after Chris, but we'd be happy to take a look at any additional questions you have and do our best to help you out.
All right, so that ends today's session. Mickey, did you have anything else you wanted to conclude with?
No, I think it was covered by the others.
All right, so I want to thank the three of you for being on this panel. I think it's been informative. It's actually been kind of fun to have a panel to talk to. We will be sending you the slides from today and some of the other supporting documents. I'll get you some printed pages from the CDC website, the how do you deal with air travel information that we talked about earlier, and some other documents you'll get directly from me in an email this afternoon. You'll also receive a link as an attendee to this webinar that asks you to complete the post-webinar survey for MSCI. And to be honest, those are very informative responses that we get from you. They spawned this particular webinar, for example. So this webinar was a suggestion that came directly from people who were listening in on our other webinars. So please complete the survey when you get it. We'll be doing another webinar next week on June 3rd. That's Wednesday. And that is another free webinar from MSCI that will feature Rob Westcott and Elizabeth Rust from Keybridge Research. That's one of MSCI's economics consulting firms. And they're going to talk about the status of the economy, pretty much US economy and Canadian economy in regard to the COVID-19 economic impacts. They'll also be talking about some of the top metals end markets. So that's probably something you don't want to miss. You'll start getting promotions about that tomorrow morning. So I want to thank everybody once again. Mickey, Tom, and Tim, I appreciate all your time. I think it's been interesting and fun. And I want everybody who's been attending, I want to thank you all, and please be safe today and stay well. Thanks a lot.
Take care all.
See ya.